Alright, year 8s, this is a bit of an experiment, but we're in an experimental time of our education, so bear with me and we'll see how we go. Now, first things first, a couple of you were away on either Monday or Tuesday or both, and that's okay. Turns out quite reasonably, seeing as we're all stuck at home now. If you're away on Monday or Tuesday, you haven't missed a great deal of content. This semester we're starting off with medieval Europe, and we're going to be looking at a few things to do with what's called the feudal system and castles and things of that nature. So what I thought I might do today, in order to get you guys caught up who were away on Monday and Tuesday, I'm going to go over some of the stuff that we've already covered and introduced a little bit of vocabulary. And we're going to do a brief exercise after I finish this video. I'll get you to do a bit of a writing exercise so that I can check up on your progress. This is a game. This is a game that I like to play occasionally in my spare time. It's a medieval Europe simulator, and you can see there's a map of medieval Europe there, done in a very medieval style. And what happens in this game, it's called Crusader Kings, and what happens is you basically play as you get to pick any one of hundreds and hundreds of medieval kings and princes and dukes and counts and things like that, and you play as a particular dynasty. So this is my character at the moment. Just for this example, this is King Harold of England. When the king dies, I will play, if we look down here, you can see all these kids that I've got. I'll play as my eldest son. And when he dies, hopefully he'll get married and have kids, and I'll play as his heir, and so on and so forth. So this is a good illustration of one of the key features of medieval Europe, which is hereditary titles. Okay, so hereditary titles means that if my father was the King of England and he does everything right and he's a good king who has the respect of his subjects, then if everything goes according to plan, it's assumed that I get to inherit his title as King of England after he dies. Now, obviously it doesn't always work out that way, because sometimes strange things happen in history. Alright, so what we've got here, there's a few little pieces of vocabulary that you're going to be asked to report back on afterwards. So if you need to, you may have to go through this video again just to pick up on bits and pieces, or you might like to do some of your own research online. These are fairly straightforward bits of vocabulary that you'll be learning. If we look at me, a handsome man with a moustache, right, I've got a title here. You can see where my title is. I'm the King of England. I've got the Kingdom of England, and I've got a whole bunch of other titles as well. The way things worked in medieval Europe was that each one of these, and you can see in the different colours, each one of these independent areas was ruled by a king or an emperor in the case of the Holy Roman Empire. So he's the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. Or a king, or in some cases it would just be a duke or an earl. And each one of them, underneath them, we've gone back to me, I'm the King of England again. Underneath them they would have what's called a group of vassals. Okay, you see this word here, vassals? So if we click on vassals, and you can see all the people who owe me their allegiance. So these are all the people who have to give me taxes if I ask them for taxes, who have to raise troops to go to war if I ask them to do that, if I go to war with Scotland, for example, or France, and who have to respect my authority as the king. So, for example, let's have a look at this first guy here. This guy's a duke. His name's Edwin Elfgarson. and he's the Duke of Mercia. And if we zoom in on the map here, you can see the Kingdom of England is outlined here. And if we zoom in closer, we'll just change the view to Duchy titles. You can see the Duchy of Mercia is outlined there. That's that sort of orangey blob in the middle. So a duchy is the next thing down from a kingdom, and a duchy is ruled by a duke. So we're going to click on Duke Edwin here. This -72 means that he doesn't like me very much, which is a problem. Alright, so he's the Duke of Mercia. He's quite a powerful man. His relationship to me is that he swears an oath to me that he will do everything I say, and I in return swear that I will protect him from any enemies that might try to overthrow him or undermine him in some way. Now, so there's the Duke. His liege, you see this word here, liege, is me. So that means the guy above him in the hierarchy is me. And he's my vassal, and in turn, he has vassals of his own. So underneath him, you can see there's a whole series of 7 earls and counts. So we'll click on an earl here. This man's name is Edric. They're not particularly original with their naming in medieval England. Okay, so he's the earl of a county. So a duke is someone who's in charge of a duchy, and an earl or a count is someone who's in charge of a county. And these, let me see if I can get, yeah, this will be fine. Okay, so each one of these highlighted areas that comes up, can you see that? Norfolk, Suffolk, Surrey, Dorset, Devon, Somerset, and so on and so forth. You can go across the Irish Sea, Desmond, Dublin, Ulster. These are all different counties, and each one of these counties has a guy in charge of them. And if you look throughout Europe, look at all those names. It's chock-a-block full of counties, and then the same historical counties that are more or less there to this day, although some of the borders have changed. And if we look, let's go to continental Europe for this one. If we look, here's the King of France. If we look at some of the counts in France, this man is the Count of Bouillon. Underneath him, or let's go to his neighbour, this man is the Count of Green. I don't know how to pronounce that. Underneath them, they've got guys and so on and so forth. Okay, so right down from the king all the way down to the lowliest peasant through about, well, I don't know, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 layers. There's just groups of people, pairings of people who swear allegiance to each other. Okay, so there are kings, there are dukes, there are counts and earls, kings, dukes, counts or earls, and beneath them there's a whole range of knights and mayors and barons and people like that. And underneath that layer are the peasants who work the land. And those are vassals and lieges to each other. Liege, vassal. And that's what's called the feudal system. Now we go back to me again, King of England. If I go over here, if I want to raise an army, the way that works is that, I know this is a little bit complicated to see, but it says here that at my disposal, I've only got 510 men. If I want to raise an army, I have to go to my vassals, the dukes and the earls and the counts, and I have to ask them to borrow my men. And that's the big difference between a feudal system and a system of government like what the Romans had before the medieval period, or like what most countries have now, where the army is a thing of its own. The government is a thing of its own. It's not dependent on personal relationships. It's not dependent on who's sitting on the throne at any given time. You can always rely on the fact that there's going to be an Australian public service. You can always rely on the fact that there's going to be an Australian army or navy. But that's not always the case in feudal times. Everything depends on the king's relationship with his vassals and with their relationship with their vassals, and so on and so forth. Now, let's have another look at one more feature of medieval Europe before I let you go. And that feature is religion. So if we look at this map, so this version of the map shows us who owns which bits of territory. This version of the map shows us which parts of the world owe their allegiance to which religious traditions. And as you can see, in most of Europe, it's big into Catholicism. You can have a look. The other day we discussed Spain during the medieval period, and you can see that southern Spain is Muslim at the time, as is, no surprise, North Africa and a large part of the Middle East. You can see that large parts of southeastern Europe and Anatolia are Eastern Orthodox as well, which is somewhat true today. Now, other parts of the world had different traditions, and you can see just how many different religious traditions there are there. But we're mostly focusing on for this next couple of weeks at least, the forms of feudalism in Western Europe, which is this part of the world here. All right. When it says Catholic, that's not just a question of what do you do on a Sunday morning. That's what do you do with your life and who do you owe your allegiance to. Now we're going to go back to my little chap here. Here's King Harold of England. Now just a little historical note, it's 1066 and King Harold's days are numbered. He's going to get shot through the eye with an arrow in about a month's time. You can see it's September 1066. So his time on the throne is coming to an end, and he's soon to be replaced with the Duke of Normandy, who has a very nasty sounding epithet. All right, but if I go back to King Harold again, his religious head, so the guy who's in charge of his religious life and religious activity, is none other than the Pope. Okay, and the Pope is the guy. The Pope only controls a little bit of territory there. You can see this area that's called the Papacy. He only controls those 2 bits of territory in Italy there, but he's got big influence over what happens in the entire Catholic world and to a certain extent in the Orthodox world as well. So a big part of medieval life is the relationship between kings and popes, and also between kings and other religious leaders, because some important people in my realm are people such as archbishops and bishops who take an advisory role. Alright, that's all we're going to look at for the time being. That gives you a bit of an overview of what feudal relationships look like in medieval Europe. I just wanted to give you a sense for how different they are to the way things operate today. There's no institutions. Last semester we looked at how to write a constitution and do institutions of government like that. The big thing to remember about medieval Europe is that there are no laws, really. There are only people. And the law in a particular part of the world or a particular part of the kingdom can change drastically depending on the character and the temperament of the people in charge of it. All right, we're going to look at that more in tomorrow's lesson. For the time being, I'd like you to access the materials I've posted on Sector and in my direct message and have a go at doing some of those exercises.